Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shub, and together with my partner and co host Patric, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Hey Patrick, it's been quite a weirdly interesting day. I think you and I had a few other meetings, but then there's been like very arbitrary changes in schedule, and somehow we didn't know we'd be doing a episode of Practical Nerds today. But there you go, here we are.
That's being entrepreneurial, using the time that someone gifts us um, I was going to say productively, but I wouldn't call practical nerds productive time.
You
So
mean using your time for nothing?
exactly
Yeah, yeah.
that's
I
bang
mean,
on.
isn't that a privilege and a luxury to, when someone gives you time, you again use the time for nothing?
Do you consider that an upgrade or a downgrade?
I consider that a privilege and a luxury.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, so we're scrambling even more than usual,
Mhm.
and that says something. Um, and you and I, we just said, hey, actually, fascinating topic could be the trust issues in construction that
Mhm.
persist throughout the industry and the opportunities that these trust issues
Yeah.
create.
Yeah. I mean, the truly interesting parallel here is obviously we are a global fund. We evaluate different market structures, etc. Quite often we draw the parallels or the contrast between developing markets or emerging markets and mature markets. One a generalization, which is also not too far from the truth, is that in mature markets, you generally find trust goes a very long way in solving for transactions and for market frictions that might exist otherwise. Whereas in many emerging markets, you see a major trust deficit and a lot of work and inefficiencies creep in due to this trust deficit. The fascinating thing is when you actually look at construction as a sector or as an industry, it feels like all over the world there are varying degrees of high trust deficit. It's all high trust deficit, but varying degrees of it. So
Hmm.
generally there's a lot of trust deficit in general across the world, and in a weird way that leads to a lot of the friction and the inefficiencies we described. But I think what I'm starting to realize is that is also a source of a lot of opportunities that we back, and therefore a source of a lot of innovation to come in.
Yeah. For me, let's perhaps in real time. You and I, we didn't script this or prepare this, so we're doing this real time. Let's break down the potential sources
Hmm.
and idiosyncrasies specific to construction that can lead to trust
Yeah.
deficits. Let me start with the first one. So, construction is a business that I keep saying that it's not an operations business, it's a supply chain business.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why that is because typically the lot size is one and not a million. A million is where I create volume of the same standardized and replaceable part. And it's because of this standardization of replaceable parts that I can generate a highly reliable and highly controlled supply chain, right?
Hmm.
So I standardize the processes, I standardize the stakeholders, suppliers, the interfaces, etc., and that's how I create reliability. So my trust is less required for the stakeholder because I replace it with trust in the process and the supply chain.
Hmm.
In construction with lot size one, it's not the same thing
Yeah.
because the process for every project could be slightly different. It could have slight nuances, slight tweaks required because the lot size is one. This is this one specific building. It has specific design aspects, specific elements, specific components, specific sequencing,
Hmm.
all of these things. So I need to have a higher trust into my supplier because I have less trust in or the ability to have less trust in a more proven supply chain or more proven process in the
Hmm.
specific part of the project. So how do I now trust a supplier? Well, typically I try to bridge this trust gap by working with someone, a company, but ideally people that I have worked with before and that I know I can literally entrust the job to get the job done,
Yeah.
right? Now, if I don't have that as a supplier, all of a sudden there's a trust deficit. So I need to
Hmm.
trust you, but how do I know that? Because we haven't worked with each other. So this lot size one, that's a big source of trust gaps across construction, I would say.
Yeah. I think if you, I agree with all of the observations you made. I think just to add to it, if you just think of what we've spoken before about track record and how what you've done before matters a great deal in construction. In general, the assumption or the belief, rightfully so, is that any construction project, whether it's home building, infrastructure, etc., it'll pretty much never happen on time, never happen within the original budget you started off with. So, if for example you quoted a certain number and given a certain deadline, it almost anyway never happens that you get that combination right the first time around. And therefore, every project manager or a person involved in this decision making is trained to assume that something will not go according to plan. That is perhaps another interpretation of why there's trust deficit, because you know through the principle of induction that something will inevitably go wrong and not go per plan. And maybe that manifests also in you not being able to trust the plans the way they're presented by the stakeholders.
So are you okay? I find this fascinating. Are you right now saying, "Hey, the developer and owner, or basically the person giving me the contract for the project is not trustworthy"? Or are you saying there are too many change requests along the way? Or
I'm saying it's the state of affairs right now, and which has been the case for several decades or presumably centuries, is that construction, as you rightly said, is a supply chain problem, and a very complex multivariate supply chain problem where
right?
even with the best of intents, something or the other always breaks in the system because, as you rightfully pointed out, it has not been designed to function harmoniously in a very synchronized manner where everything uh, perfectly lines up in the right sequence, in the right quantities, no wastage. Every human in the system also perfectly aligned. There's always something happening, not because anyone has the intention of being a poor performer or not getting things right, but it's a very complex problem. The more variables you throw at any problem,
I
all
see.
of which need to align perfectly, it is actually almost a statistical certainty that it will not work out.
That's okay. Great way of putting it.
Yeah.
My favorite example to your point, or one of my favorite examples, I should say, to your point. Okay, I'm getting a delivery from my supplier onto the construction site.
Hmm.
Relatively large construction site. In front of the construction site, there's a street, and I
Yes.
tell my supplier, "Hey, this is the address of the gate to get onto the construction site."
Hmm.
Normal people unfamiliar with construction at this point would think an address is highly specific and can be found on a Google map and with a GPS.
Yes.
I could even give my supplier a GPS coordinate, by the way. I
Hmm.
could do that.
Yeah.
And yet, the following screw up regularly happens. The truck driver of that supplier or
Hmm.
the third party logistics provider that is driving for the supplier has the address or the GPS coordinate and parks across the street.
Hmm.
Same point, but on the other side of the street, 25 meters down the line. Why 25 meters down the line? Because there might be right now space to park the truck
Yeah.
without obstructing, for example, oncoming traffic.
Yes.
That's a huge issue. That can cost you 4 to 6 hours because
Hmm.
depending on how big the delivery is. Because now I perhaps need to put 3 apprentices on the job. Hey, grab the wheelbarrows or get
Yes.
into the machine, drive across the street, and just carry it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on the right side of the street to the gate of my construction site, and from there further.
Hmm.
This
Yeah.
sounds like a silly issue to someone that has never seen a construction site or that comes from a different industry. But what
Hmm.
you're pointing out, Shub, is that it's these little things that accumulate and you cannot control
Yeah.
in a lot size one type project.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so some may say, hey, you know what? Why can't you perfectly plan the delivery in a way where, when they show up at the gate or access point, it's empty? I guess you could, but then what if at the specific moment the delivery shows up, it's not, right? Then you've caused a major disruption. So most construction operations will be structured the way you laid it out, Patrick, where you'll create this, margin of safety for yourself with human intervention, so that it's not a perfect plan, but it also minimizes like a major disruption to whatever else is happening, but that
Yeah.
also creates the additional buffers and whatnot.
Yeah. Now, at this point, I want to say just something else before we come back to the trust topic that we're discussing. So, it is exactly at this point that the proponents and evangelists of prefab slash offsite slash modular will say, yeah, but I can perfectly standardize my supply chain and my project sequence because I have standardized all the design and I've standardized all the components.
Hmm.
Um, and that's why I can do that. At this point, I love the following example. Um, Prefabricated wall elements delivered
Hmm.
on the wrong floor,
Hmm.
now stored on the wrong floor. The floor gets actually shut down from the other wall elements, and now the wall elements are trapped on this floor, which belonged on the upper floor. Real
Yeah.
example. Now, if you build with bricks, no problem. I mean, still sucks that you have to do the extra lifting work, but
Hmm.
I can carry it through the wall up to the next floor. These
Yeah.
wall elements are trapped.
Yeah.
Tell me
Correct.
what I do now. So it's not like just because I have prefabricated components, my supply chain is free of troubles. It still can happen because lot size one and because lots of interdependent variables. So
Yeah.
the yeah the trust issue persists because of these two factors at least.
I mean, just to emphasize, maybe this is also part of what you describe as lot size one, but another weird or extremely important actually aspect of lot size one also means, for example, in a home buying context, it might mean, hey, this is like the single biggest purchase made by that individual. So you can't randomly mess things up in the chase for precision. The contractor as well as the home buyer will probably chase certainty over perfection, right? Similarly, if you're building public infrastructure or a very large commercial building, you are likely to chase certainty that it gets kind of done, kind of within the budget ranges, kind of within schedule, rather than risk a tiny chance that it goes catastrophically wrong
Yeah,
just because you're chasing perfection.
yeah. And it works the other way around too. If I'm let's say I'm the um, owner of a
Hmm.
project and I'm, requesting offers, and I'm not optimizing for perfection. I'm optimizing for cost at
Hmm.
this point. So I'm requesting, tenders, bids, and I'm getting all these different kinds of bids. If my RFP document, sorry, RFQ document, my RFQ
Hmm.
document, the BIM model that I handed out, etc., is not exceptionally good, most likely I am forcing my bidders to make certain assumptions, enrich my model, make certain assumptions about it, etc. Again, because lot size one, and so on. If I now pick by the cheapest offer as my main criterion, I'm exceptionally likely to have picked the one that has made the worst assumptions.
Yes.
And that creates a downstream issue for my entire project
Hmm.
where I've just increased the probability that my project will have delays, that my project, will take shortcuts, etc., etc. Which in the context of trust means I need to be able, if I want to optimize cost, I
Hmm.
need to have the ability to not pick the cheapest offer because I can trust that the person or the organization that submitted the not cheapest offer will actually be most likely to achieve that price.
Yes.
So again, this is where trust comes in. And if I don't have that level of trust, how do I actually pick my contractor or my executing organization very well? I will be forced to go by price or
Mm-hmm.
cost. And with that, I will actually increase my likelihood of delivering a bad project.
Yeah.
But the other way also doesn't work. I also cannot say, hey, just because someone bid higher, they are better at executing the project. See, that's where the problem comes in. So now I
Yes.
actually am selecting those bids. I need already to kind of have trust into who is going to have the most accurate offer.
Hmm. Yeah, that's right. It's fascinating, how this trust deficit plays out in figuring out what is probabilistically the safest option, which is also why we've spoken about track record before on this podcast, and why once you have built repeatability, construction tends to be a business where loyalty is rewarded, stickiness is rewarded. For exactly that reason, it's a weird traditional way of solving for this trust deficit, or at least to minimize your downside while a trust deficit exists.
Absolutely. So let's talk about it in the context of okay, the project has been accepted. It's a lot size
Hmm.
one project, lots of interdependencies, etc. Now I'm a material supplier
Hmm.
and I'm selling to the general contractor. Let's begin with an enterprise project and then perhaps move to an SMB type project.
Sure.
Material supplier selling into an enterprise general contractor.
Hmm.
Who of these two needs to trust what?
So in general, the way it will play out is the enterprise buyer, the developer or contractor, etc., whoever so may be, will generally say, "Hey, you know what? I've chosen to do business with you, supplier. Uh, but I will never pay you an advance, or if I do pay you an advance, it'll be a relatively small sum just to give you an expression that I'm in this order with you, right? But say you deliver a certain quantity of material to me, I'll not pay you an advance for most of it, or I'll not even pay you on delivery. So what you have to do is basically you have to leave the material with me. I will then take my time to verify that it is indeed
Hmm.
the quality and quantity you had promised to deliver me.
Hmm.
And then, okay, now once I've acknowledged that it is indeed the quality and quantity that you've delivered me, at that point, then you can issue an invoice to me. And then you also need to allow me some time after the invoice is issued to actually make the payment.
Can you imagine that happening in automotive supply chains? Absolutely not,
Definitely not.
because every minute they get the exact same delivery
Yeah.
on the assembly line.
Hmm. Yeah. So look, even in the best of cases, I think most people don't choose to call it a trust deficit, but this is 100% a consequence of a trust deficit.
Yeah. So what is the material supplier now trusting?
The material supplier is now trusting that, hey, the order is legit. The buyer in this case will not just hold on to the materials and not pay, and therefore whatever they have done will not amount to nothing.
Hmm.
So that's the trust leap of faith the material supplier is taking in this case.
I mean, depending on what material I'm delivering here, I sometimes have to trust this for 30 days.
Could be a whole lot longer if
Hmm.
it's a major project.
Hmm.
Now the thing is, it's also like a trust deficit which transmits through the value chain. Now, because the material supplier has been subjected to this, the material supplier may now, if it's going backward through its raw material suppliers or maybe further upstream, may say, hey, you know what, you did all this work for me, but I have not yet got paid by my client. So you know what? Thanks for doing all this work for me, but you'll only get paid much later. You'll not
Mm-hmm.
get paid now. So that is
Mm-hmm.
their version. So they're taking the trust deficit they received from their client and they're transmitting it upstream,
Right.
or at least trying to transmit it upstream,
Right.
depending on the way the bargaining power may work. So
Yeah.
this whole thing creates like a float in the system, which is the result of this trust deficit.
Yeah. The next trust deficit that I can think of is, hey, will you actually be around tomorrow? So I'll
Hmm.
give you a contract.
Yes.
Perhaps I give you a down payment,
Hmm.
But it's not even the down payment that worries me the most. It's that I'm subjected to big penalties if I don't deliver.
Yes.
Lot size one project, lots of interdependencies, as we pointed
Yes.
out.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're not around anymore tomorrow.
Yes.
I'm waiting for your delivery. My crew is waiting.
Mm-hmm.
My subsequent work steps are waiting. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're not around anymore, all of a sudden,
My
I'm not
project,
sure I can deliver.
yeah, my project is having a bad time because of your inability to fulfill your promises.
So, how do I now make sure that I can trust this person, this company's balance sheet? It's
Mm-hmm.
not even about the operational capability at this point. At this point, specific to this trust deficit, it is, hey, can you show me the balance sheet
Yes.
for me to actually give you the project, then give you a down payment, etc. That is something we see in enterprise scale projects,
Mm-hmm.
and we also see it in smaller scale projects where SMB contractors or
Yeah.
SMB suppliers of any other kind are to bid on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this typically affects the contractor type business though the most.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I think this also is fascinating how, in a weird way, it creates this additional burden on the contractors in order to demonstrate that they are, in a weird way, that they're worthy of being trusted, to be
Hmm.
entrusted with this project. And therefore, depending on the market context, depending on the project, depending on what they use, there's different avenues open to them to demonstrate that they're worthy of being entrusted with the project. I don't know if you wish to discuss all those means. Maybe we'll save it for another episode. But there's a lot of that is burdensome for the
Hmm.
contractors, introduces additional costs, additional liquidity constraints on them, just
I
in
want
order
to
to establish their creditworthiness and
because
trustworthiness.
that is the trust deficit that the contractor now has. It
Yes.
is. I mean, the internet is full of anecdotes. You just Google it, go on Reddit, go on LinkedIn. You will find many anecdotes where contractors trusted that the project owner
Mm-hmm.
can be in a new construction context. It could be a developer in a renovation context. It could be an asset owner or asset manager. Actually, has the means to pay me after I have completed the work and
Yes.
is going to be there tomorrow as well to
Mm-hmm.
pay. And the internet is full of stories where contractors went bust because one big invoice was not paid on
Mm-hmm.
time or at all.
Yeah.
And that's the trust that the contractor has. You can see it in the Western markets, Shub, on the smallest of scales, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You can see this going on, where contractors that serve, consumer households, individual people, families,
Okay.
oftentimes will not accept. Sorry, let me phrase it slightly differently. Oftentimes, in the past 3, 4, 5 years, will have shifted their focus to more commercial projects or more enterprise scale projects or more public work type
Mm.
projects and away from households because they say, hey, I actually do not know, first of all, how painful the customer is. Maybe they're nagging at me all the time. But
Mm.
most importantly, what is their payment morale?
Yes.
So, how do I fix this trust issue on that smallest of level as a contractor that serves families and households? Typically, I only take referrals anymore
Mm.
as a small contractor. So, if I get an inbound via website, forget it. I'm not even giving you an offer. Like
Yeah.
this is legit. This is exactly what's happening. I'm not even giving you an offer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you come in from a referral from a trusted other contractor, a trusted source, at least I might consider it if they have worked for you. But
Mm-hmm.
overall, it's much better to just level up and go to a bigger project with a contractor, developer, or asset manager that again has the track record of paying on time and paying reliably. So there's
Mm.
the other side of the trust deficit in terms
Yeah.
of, hey, will they pay me?
Oh, indeed. In fact, don't we also observe, Patrick, across Western Europe, Germany, and other markets, a similar sort of version of this problem happening where many material suppliers, retail stores, etc., they're so flush with orders. Now they'll basically not entertain new orders unless, actually, this is also true for craftsmen and hand workers, as they're referred to. They'll not take new orders unless it's a very warm referral. For the most part, they're kind of full of work. They don't want to deal with the hassle of a new source of business where they'll have to again figure out if it's a trustworthy source, if they're getting paid or not.
Yeah, so 2019, 2021, and even 2022 in Europe and the US, every trade was like that, and both labor and material. Um, the COVID stimuli, they certainly didn't help here. Since 2023, excuse me, the order books are depleting a little bit,
Okay.
and a lot of capacity has come back onto the market. But still, it is hugely undersupplied in general. So, if I'm a contractor that actually has a reputation for doing good work, I can still have my pick. I can still pick my project. I will still have a big order book. It is a little bit the adverse selection problem where basically it's the bad capacity that becomes free
I see.
and comes back on the market. And a great example here is if you're an electrical contractor that has found a specialization in power grid related contracting for utilities or for TSOs or DSOs, grid operators, you can have your pick of the projects and you will be booked in the Western markets for years to come. You don't even have to think of business development. Just don't screw it up, but you don't have to do anything. And in fact, these utilities, DSOs, TSOs will have an incentive to make you grow and make you larger because typically today the contractor base that they work with is in the hundreds,
Okay.
plural. And they will want to consolidate that, but they cannot because there's no big suppliers in the market to actually help them that. So they will even try to make you grow and take a larger share of their spend in that regard. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you are saying is happening in general, and it's continuing to trend there for certain, let's say, types of projects right now or types of trades right now. The order book is not entirely as full as it was perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, but it will generally still trend in that direction and become very constrained again.
I'm thinking there's two takeaways perhaps right away from the discussion we've had thus far. One is, perhaps you can also, if you identify a value chain or a supply chain which is of interest to you as a founder or an investor, you could also identify the problem statement by tracing the source of the lack of trust or the trust deficit as being the pressure point or the pain point in the node as where you could perhaps approach with like an answer, and hopefully, and this is the second takeaway, you have an approach where it actually helps foster more trust between you as a business and your client, and it enhances trust rather than feed into the trust deficit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's perhaps discuss a few example angles. Some of them, I think you and I are comfortable sharing the business because they are so advanced that you're not going to catch them anyway. I think one of them
Sure.
would be Pay,
Hmm.
if you want to talk about that. A few
Sure.
other examples that we might mention over the next 10, 15 minutes. I will be a little bit more comfortable not mentioning the companies or the
All right.
details, but perhaps give the general sense of direction. So why don't we start with Pay and how they inject trust into transactions?
Sure. So TazaPay is a portfolio company of ours from Singapore where we've been invested in for about 3 years now. What they solve for is to provide payments infrastructure for B2B transactions in a cross-border context. Now, just if you're thinking this, perhaps you're already getting the hint of where the source of trust deficit comes here. We're describing a cross-border situation. So think imports, exports, think of companies with distributed workflows, distributed supply chains. So you have someone in one country selling products or services to someone located in another country, or you have vendors in one place, service providers in another, employees perhaps somewhere else, manufacturers maybe in a fifth country, and so on and so forth. And you need to keep transferring sums of money across these different countries at each time with the hope and expectation that you're transferring money only if the corresponding services or products are delivered, and it's not going into a black hole. Obviously, there's also a bit of aspect where there may be foreign exchanges, there may be perhaps some other implications of moving money into different jurisdictions and so on. So there's various sources of trust deficit in a transaction like that. So what they offer as a platform is different methods of, firstly, different currencies, different methods of paying in into your local bank account so that you're not forced to immediately move the money abroad into institutions or mechanisms that are not directly accessible to you in your local jurisdiction.
So an example could be a buyer from another continent buys my construction machinery, perhaps gives me this bank guarantee.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, foreign language. Is this
Yes.
bank even legit? I have never
Yes.
heard of this bank because that's not my country. And now I'm supposed to ship the machine.
Yes, correct. So, and apart from all this payment infrastructure, they also offer what they refer to as pay and hold. Think of it like an escrow feature, which allows for the payments to be released only when there's a two-factor verification of the transaction conditions being met. So, in other words, you're not wiring into like a black hole with the hope that it's not you're just giving up your money for free. There is like checks and balances in place that if the transaction conditions are not met, the money will come back to you. And that's like the methodology of the system, along with fraud protection and so on. So it's quite a complex problem to solve, interestingly it arises all from trust deficit in various forms. But it's fascinating how that uncovers a problem statement in something which many people would think is a well solved problem, payments. But the moment you introduce large scale B2B transactions, different countries, etc., it becomes you again introduce sources of mistrust.
This is so important on the two ingredients here. I don't want to call them first, maybe they are first principle, but the ingredient is one, it's a big transaction, and two, there's a lack of frequency between these two parties. If I
Yeah.
have a lot of frequency between two parties, I have trust in each other, right? Again, this is lot size 1 million versus lot size one.
Yeah.
Whereas if in a lot size one context, perhaps not saying I buy machinery for every project, that is not my point, but in general, if the scale at which I operate makes me do certain things only a couple times a year, I will also only order certain things a couple times a year, which means that, hey, maybe I'm doing the first project in this kind of country, and now I need construction machinery in that kind of country, and this supplier gives me the best terms, but we have never worked with each other. This happens in construction all the time. So now I
Yeah.
need an intermediary to basically guarantee the transaction. Yeah.
Indeed.
Let's stay first on the construction execution and then work our way backwards again, perhaps into pre-construction. So another trust deficit that we discussed is, hey, are you still around tomorrow? So
Yes.
one thing that exists as a product in the market to help with that is surety bonds. There's 2 or 3 different kinds of surety bonds. Not the place, not the time now to break them all down.
Sure.
Everybody can Google it. It's a highly established product, especially in the US, also quite established in Europe and France, for example. I think in India only recently, 2022, accepted, legally that is, accepted. So that's an interesting market for this. And what a surety bond basically does is it's an external party that issues the bond to a general contractor, guaranteeing to their customer that, hey, if this contractor doesn't deliver for reason A, I will step in and, depends a little bit on what type of surety bond, basically I can underwrite that someone else will execute it, or I could underwrite the financial penalties from it, etc. So that is a product that does in principle exist. However, this is easier to acquire if you're a large general contractor and if you operate in a market where there is many of the same type of contractors doing the same types of projects. Whereas if I'm a small contractor, or I am in a market where actually the contracting business is not as harmonized as it is in the US for single family home building, for example, because believe it or not, that is a relatively harmonized market, in spite of what you might think if you're in the US. If you compare that globally, that is a harmonized market.
Okay.
So if you're in a less harmonized market, the financial services industry might have never found a way to truly develop an underwriting model and a distribution motion that actually works, because these surety bonds, they don't have a huge ACV. So to give you an example, in France, a surety bond for one project for an SMB type contractor that delivers 100, 200, 300, 500,000, that's $100. Okay. So it's not easy
You're
to,
referring to the premium, perhaps, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The underwritten policy that is bigger, but like the premium that I could collect is $100 there. And overall my ACV from that one project is not particularly large. So now I need to develop an underwriting model that is actually highly reliable, even though the market might not be as harmonious, right? Or the type of contractor might not be as harmonious. and I need to then develop it on a distribution motion where I can address 300,000 SMB type contractors, right? So it's a great product, but how do I inject it into SMB in many markets? Not as straightforward.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think what we have implied but not said overtly is, I mean, it is more or less a form of an insurance product. So ultimately, insurance works best when you can collect money very predictably and be assured or assure yourself that there is an extremely low likelihood of there being a systematic and correlated failure. Because every now and then, if there's a one odd case, that's fine. But if there's a correlated failure where a whole bunch of your the principles go down, then you're toast as an insurance company.
So this is where I want to stop you. Let's not now go into the details because there's a bit of secret sauce here from two of our portfolio companies on
Yes.
two different continents, how they actually spot these
Yes.
early indicators of failure and what allows them to underwrite better. So
Exactly.
sorry to be the party pooper here, but this is the level of detail I'm uncomfortable sharing right now. But
Yes.
but it is a very interesting trust wedge
Indeed.
into the market. Perhaps working backwards now from here into the pre-construction phase. So we said earlier that, hey, basically shit in, shit out. If the RFQ document and the model that I deliver to the contractors for bidding is pretty poor, why should I expect a great bid that will be very close to the actual execution? And if I don't know the contractors, how do I actually know whether they make an accurate bid or not? Any ideas how to use this trust gap as a venture opportunity?
Are you talking about something which makes use of the vast repository of information the firm may have to process it for more monetizable ideas and stuff like that?
What are you thinking?
I mean, I'll allow you. Let me not steal your thunder. I'll let you go ahead.
So I think there's two or three interesting opportunities here that I've seen across deal flow. All of them I found fascinating for different reasons. One of them is when you basically create a new type of authoring tool, 3D authoring tool, BIM authoring tool, that takes the detailed but not perfectly detailed, perfect for estimation, that is, perfectly detailed for estimation type 3D and BIM model, and allows a contractor to very, very quickly enrich this to a much higher level of detail. So that is an interesting angle because with more detailing and more information, I increase the likelihood of accuracy in my planning for the bid. And then, the bid is basically just a binding representation of how I plan to do the project, right? So I increase the accuracy of my planning. That is one interesting aspect.
Yeah.
The second one is, I find it a bit sad when a lot of our community thinks about the estimation process as part of submitting my bid. They tend to place all of the emphasis on the QTO, the quantity takeoff, and very, very little emphasis on the pricing and getting the prices right. So, of course, I mean, this is a multiplication, quantity times price. Okay, sure. But actually, if I have a very good, if I have a sufficiently good model, I will be plus minus a few percentage points right on the quantity. But regardless of the model, I can still be plus minus 20% wrong on the price. So the thing that moves my needle and is massively uncorrelated with the quality of the model is the price, not the QTO. But all the pre-construction software and attention goes on the QTO. Wrong emphasis, wrong wedge. Focus on the price. Two products here that increase the level of trust. One, so this is a portfolio company of ours that has built its name is Spotlock, and that has built a forward purchase contract for specific construction materials which move the needle on the bid a lot. So the ones that get purchased in large quantities. And the problem here that they are solving with is, imagine you're bidding on a large project today, let's say 1st of January 2025. and the project starts in, let's say, 6 months after I submitted my bid, and a specific type of steel, specific type of cement, I need to purchase then in 12 months and in 18 months as
Yes.
part of my execution. Markets move, prices change, wars start, minerals become less accessible
Yeah.
globally, energy costs go up. So the volatility of these prices is very, very high.
Indeed.
Sorry, no, can be very, very high over
Yes.
such a relatively long time frame. But my price is locked in to a large degree, might even be locked in if it's a full fixed price offer to a full degree. So now if the purchase price moves for me, meaning it becomes cheaper, hey, that's additional margin. Fantastic.
Yeah.
If the purchase price moves against me, I might now be on a negative margin in
Yes.
this project. So that's where a trust product like a forward purchase contract from someone like Spotblock actually comes in. So that's one. And two, back to the pricing again, in the thinking process here, back to the pricing. Some nice London-based police
Indeed.
sirens.
Ignore the ambience and treat it as a random case of a trust deficit playing out in the real world.
Yeah. So real quick, back to the price and the QTO. What we have found is that a lot of the pricing information and the power of an organization, such as a general contractor, sits between the ears of people and not in a pricing database. If it's set in a pricing database, it's outdated the moment you enter it into the pricing database because the price can be something else tomorrow. But the humans, the people in your organization and outside of your organization that they collaborate with, they have the information
Yeah.
between their ears. So there is opportunity to make that information between the ears more accessible through better collaboration.
I mean, I guess just to add to, sorry for all the ambient noise, guys. Just
It's
tune it out if you're
very
interested.
atmospherical.
Atmospheric. Okay. Um, I think what it's somewhere around the start of this discussion, we also spoke about how payment terms and larger businesses choosing to pay their suppliers much later is one of the most obvious and elementary forms of trust deficit in construction. We are constantly on the lookout for businesses which use innovative ways either to reduce their own working capital burden, because that's what it translates to, all of this payment terms into a working capital burden for the supplier, or who make it easier for other businesses to manage this working capital burden in a very efficient way. Again, I don't want to get into specifics and like give up ideas on specific opportunities. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for businesses, for relevant for construction all over the globe, because it's
But
such
now,
a
now, now tell me something. So we're discussing this, and it's almost like we're going into the fundamental function of how business in construction works and
yes.
why it works the way it does. And a lot of that has to do with the trust deficits being triggered by certain first principles. And yet, the venture industry, when they talk to us, when they talk to founders, they will ask you, Shub, what's your AI?
Yeah.
Sorry, how does AI now help with these first principles?
I mean, I don't see it. That's my answer. But hang on, I've also heard something, also to the extent of, for example, investors saying something like, "Hey, we don't like any business with working capital,"
Yeah.
right? But I mean, usually in my head, the counter question in my head is, "Hey, but give me a more effective way to address the trust deficit in construction." So if you take away a business's ability to extend working capital to its clients as a way to demonstrate that, hey, here you go, we're willing to bridge the trust deficit by extending working capital, you take that flexibility away from a business, then you're also taking away their ability to build trust. In turn, what that means is you're demanding from the client, hey, you know what? I'll not give you any working capital. So you better start trusting me immediately, even though I'm like a young company with no track record.
Sure.
And that to me really seems like a lot to demand from a client. And it's also demanding too much of a behavior change in construction.
I mean, completely triggered a completely lateral thought, lateral thought. Are
Hmm.
these the same investors that have invested in all neobanks and are okay with billions of working capital there? Or are they perhaps not even aware that their business have a lot of working capital because it's a neobank?
Generally speaking, yes, they are. That is very
By the
true.
way, I have noticed one thing, and this is where a finance degree or finance specific major comes
Hmm.
really handy. Very few people on this planet actually realize that the cash in the accounts of customers of a bank is actually not a cash item, it's actually a obligation item, a
Correct.
liability on the
That's
balance
right.
sheet of a bank. When you tell that to people, they're like, huh? But it's cash. Yes, but it's cash that you owe to that customer and you are just entrusted to currently look over it. And that makes it a working capital item for you because now you better use this cash, but in the way that from a regulatory perspective, you're allowed to do it. Don't do it the FTX way.
Correct. Or
But hey,
even
I don't like working capital. I just like every neobank.
don't do it the FTX way, but also don't do it the Silicon Valley Bank way.
Also true.
Yeah,
Also true. You're right. Which was another forward issue.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. Japan carry trade is also a fantastic example
indeed.
of that.
Wow, we started with trust deficit, and somehow we found our way to the Japan carry trade and FTX. I mean, I guess trust deficit and FTX go, so I think that's not too inconsistent.
But so look, my point is the following, right? So if you're a founder starting to look into construction, thinking about it from a fundamental business function perspective of where are actually trust deficits that I can exploit is a very legit way of starting to think about building a
Hmm.
generational company in construction. Whereas where can I apply AI? That is
Hmm.
not a particularly smart way of thinking about it in the
Yeah,
first place.
I would agree. Yeah,
Great.
yeah,
So maybe in a year or so we will reveal some of the details that some of our companies have used for some of these aspects.
yes. Very specific teaser on what's to come in the future. Very detailed, very revealing teaser.
Yes. If you have identified a big trust deficit and you think you are making money and business with it instantly, then you should talk to us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. What do you trust in your calendar for next week?
Trust in my calendar. Okay, so I have a few portfolio catch ups. Very excited about one of them. I'm also there's one of the opportunities that I think teased about sometime in our most recent discussion. Very interesting how that will work towards solving the trust deficit issue in the marketplace.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, and there's a couple of interesting portfolio updates I'm working through as well, just to evaluate how they go in the future and what we should be doing about it.
Okay, got it. Q4 deal flow is very, very strong. Not
Hmm.
in terms of numbers necessarily, that is, you know, ebbs and flows, but
Yeah,
sort of uniform. But I think the quality of companies that we're seeing right now
yeah.
is very good across the board and also in Europe, which is my region. So I have two companies next week that I'm very excited about. Two others that I have first chats or first chat in a long time with that had some interesting aspects in the past.
Okay,
So I'm just looking forward
nice,
generally to the quality in the calendar.
nice. Looks like a nice, strong week.
Yes, sir. All right, man. I'll wish you a happy weekend and I'll see you next week.
We'll see each other next week, sir.